Princess Velara stood at the window of her chamber, watching the ships arrive from distant worlds. Another day, another suitor. She had lost count of how many had come before her father's throne, each one more boring than the last dot. The Cathari Empire stretched across 100 star systems. Her people were ancient and proud. They stood tall, with skin like polished black stone and eyes that glowed soft amber in the dark. For 10,000 years, they had ruled this corner of the galaxy. And for 10,000 years, their princesses had married for alliance, for power, for the good of the empire. Velara understood her duty. She simply could not bring herself to fulfill it. Her father, Emperor Draskin, sat on his throne as the 48th suitor entered the Great Hall. This one was a prince from the Vorland systems, a species known for their warriors. He was tall and muscular, covered in golden scales that caught the light as he walked. His voice boomed through the chamber as he listed his victories in battle, the worlds he had conquered, the enemies he had crushed. Velara sat beside her father, her face perfectly still. She had learned long ago to hide her thoughts behind a mask of royal calm. Inside, she felt nothing but exhaustion. The Vorland prince finished his speech and knelt before her. "I offer you my strength, princess. My armies, my worlds. Together, we would be unstoppable." She looked at him for a long moment. He was handsome, she supposed. Powerful, certainly. He would make a fine husband for someone who wanted those things. "Tell me," she said, "what do you do when you are not conquering worlds?" The prince blinked, confused by the question. "I train for battle, Your Highness. I prepare for the next conquest. And what brings you joy? What makes you laugh? What keeps you awake at night with wonder?" He stared at her, unable to answer. No one had ever asked him such things. Velara rose from her seat. "Thank you for coming, Prince. You may return to your systems." Her father sighed heavily as the prince was escorted out. "Daughter, you cannot reject them all." "I can if they are all the same," she replied. 3 days later, a small human ship arrived at Keth Prime. It was nothing special to look at, just a standard diplomatic vessel with the blue and white markings of the Earth Federation. The Cathari guards barely glanced at it as it landed. Humans were new to the galaxy. They had only discovered faster-than-light travel a century ago, a blink of an eye compared to the ancient races. They were small, fragile, short-lived. Most species considered them little more than curious newcomers, not worth serious attention. The human delegation came to negotiate trade agreements. They wanted access to the rare minerals found in the outer systems of the Empire. In exchange, they offered technology, cultural exchange, and the promise of future friendship. Ambassador Clara Webb led the group. She was a woman in her 50s, with gray streaking through her dark hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She had spent 30 years negotiating deals across the galaxy, and she was very good at her job. Behind her walked Commander Lucas Grant, the military officer assigned to protect the delegation. He was everything a human soldier was supposed to be: tall, broad-shouldered, confident. His uniform was covered in medals, and he walked like a man who expected others to move out of his way. And behind them both, carrying a bag of translation equipment and data pads, was a young man named Eli Porter. Eli was 28 years old. He had brown hair that never quite stayed in place and a face that people forgot 5 minutes after meeting him. He was the delegation's xenolinguist, which meant he spent his days translating languages and studying alien cultures. It was important work, but no one ever noticed him doing it. He liked it that way. The delegation was given rooms in the guest wing of the palace. That evening, they attended a formal banquet in their honor. The great hall was filled with Cathari nobles, all of them tall and elegant in their flowing robes. The humans looked small and plain among them. Commander Grant saw an opportunity. He had heard the stories about the princess who rejected every suitor. He had seen pictures of her, beautiful and mysterious. And he thought, as many confident men do, that he might be the one to succeed where others had failed. During the meal, he made his way to Ambassador Webb's side. "I want to request an audience with the Emperor," he said quietly. "I wish to present myself as a suitor for the princess." Webb nearly choked on her wine. "Absolutely not. We are here for trade negotiations, not romantic adventures." "Think about it," Grant insisted. "If I marry the princess, the alliance between Earth and the Cathari Empire would be unbreakable. It's a political opportunity we cannot ignore." Webb wanted to refuse, but she could not argue with his logic. Reluctantly, she arranged the audience. The next morning, Commander Grant stood before the imperial court in his finest dress uniform. His medals gleamed under the lights. His boots were polished to a mirror shine. He looked every inch the hero he believed himself to be. Princess Velara watched from her throne, her amber eyes revealing nothing. Grant spoke for 20 minutes. He talked about humanity's rise to the stars, their military victories against hostile species, their technological achievements. He talked about his own career, the battles he had won, the commendations he had received. He spoke with passion and pride, projecting his voice to every corner of the hall. When he finished, he knelt before the princess with practiced grace. "I offer myself to you, Princess Velara. I offer the strength of humanity, the courage of our people, and my own devoted heart." The court fell silent, waiting for her response. Velara studied him for a long moment. Then she tilted her head slightly, a gesture that meant curiosity among her people. "You speak well," she said. "You stand proudly. You present yourself as a man of great importance." She paused. "But in all your speech, you never once looked me in the eye." Grant's confident expression faltered. "Your Highness, You looked at my crown, at my father's throne, at the nobles around the room, judging their reactions." Her voice was calm but cutting. "You looked at everything I represent, but you never looked at me." She rose from her seat, and the court held its breath. "You are the 48th suitor to stand before me," she said. "And like all the others, you see only a prize to be won, a stepping stone to power." She turned away from him. "You may return to your delegation, Commander. This audience is over." Grant stood frozen, his face red with humiliation. The Cathari nobles whispered behind their hands. Ambassador Webb closed her eyes in despair, and in the back of the hall, unnoticed by anyone, Eli Porter watched it all with quiet interest. He had seen something during the banquet the night before, something that no one else seemed to notice. The princess had looked bored during every conversation, her responses automatic and empty. But once, just once, her eyes had shown a flicker of something real. It had happened when a servant girl dropped a tray of glasses. The crash had echoed through the hall, and the girl had frozen in terror, expecting punishment. But the princess had looked at her with something like sympathy, something like recognition. As if she understood what it felt like to be trapped. Eli thought about that look as he returned to his quarters. He thought about it for a long time. The rejection of Commander Grant became the most talked about event in the palace. Servants whispered about it in the kitchens. Nobles discussed it over their morning meals. The humans had embarrassed themselves in front of the entire court, and everyone found it very amusing. Ambassador Webb spent the following day apologizing to every Cathari official she could find. She promised that there would be no more incidents, no more inappropriate requests. The humans were here for trade, nothing else. Commander Grant refused to leave his quarters. He sat in the dark, nursing his wounded pride and planning how he might recover from this disaster. And Eli Porter went about his work as if nothing had happened. The trade negotiations continued in a large conference room on the 3rd floor of the palace. Eli sat at the end of the long table, his translation equipment spread out before him. His job was simple: listen to everything translate anything that the universal translator missed, and keep his mouth shut unless someone asked him a question. No one ever asked him questions. The Cathari trade minister was a stern old male named Vortek. He had been negotiating deals since before Eli's grandparents were born, and he did not trust humans. Every offer the ambassador made was met with suspicion. Every compromise was picked apart for hidden traps. Eli listened carefully to Vortek's words. The universal translator did a decent job with the basic meaning, but it missed the subtle layers beneath. The Cathari language was complex, filled with double meanings and cultural references. A single phrase could mean 3 different things, depending on the speaker's tone and the context of the conversation. At one point, Vortek used an old expression that the translator turned into nonsense. Ambassador Webb's face tightened with confusion, and the negotiation ground to a halt. Eli leaned over to Webb and spoke quietly. He's referencing an old story about 2 moons that orbit the same planet. The moons are different sizes, but they share the sky equally. It's a parable about patience and mutual benefit. He's not rejecting your offer. He's asking you to show that you're willing to build a relationship slowly, not rush for immediate profit. Webb's eyes widened slightly. She nodded and adjusted her approach, speaking about long-term partnerships and gradual trust building instead of quick returns. Vortek's posture relaxed. The negotiation moved forward. No one thanked Eli. No one even looked at him. But he did not mind. He was used to being invisible. What he did not know was that someone had noticed him very much. Princess Velara sat in a small alcove at the side of the conference room, hidden behind a decorative screen. She had told her father that she wanted to observe the negotiations, to learn about human diplomatic methods. This was partially true, but mostly she was curious about the quiet man who sat at the end of the table. She had first noticed him at the banquet, before Commander Grant's foolish display. While the other humans had been laughing and talking loudly, trying to impress the Cathari nobles, this one had been watching the servants. Not in a suspicious way, but with genuine interest. When the serving girl had dropped her tray, he had been the first to move, kneeling beside her and helping her gather the broken pieces. He had spoken to her gently in Cathari. Not the simple phrases that most aliens learned, but real Cathari, with proper grammar and correct pronunciation. The girl had looked at him with surprise and gratitude, and he had smiled at her before returning to his seat. Later that evening, Velara had seen him talking with one of the palace guards. Again, he spoke in Cathari, asking about the guard's family, his home province, his favorite traditional foods. The guard had been stunned. In his 20 years of service, no alien had ever asked him such things. Now, watching him in the conference room, Velara saw the same pattern. He listened more than he spoke. He noticed things that others missed. And when he did speak, his words were careful and thoughtful, designed to help rather than to impress. He was completely different from every suitor she had ever met. When the negotiations ended for the day, Velara made her decision. She stepped out from behind the screen and walked toward the human delegation. Her guards appeared at her sides immediately. The humans straightened with surprise, their faces showing confusion and a little fear. A princess did not simply approach foreign diplomats in hallways. Ambassador Webb bowed deeply. "Your Highness, we are honored by your presence. If there is anything, I wish to speak with your translator," Velara said, cutting her off. Alone, the delegation exchanged worried glances. Commander Grant, who had reluctantly joined them for the negotiations, stepped forward with a forced smile. "Your Highness, I would be happy to. I did not ask for you, Commander." Velara's voice was cold. "I asked for him." She pointed at Eli, who had gone very pale. "You, walk with me." Eli looked at Ambassador Webb, uncertain what to do. Webb nodded slowly, her expression saying that he had no choice but to obey. he gathered his things and followed the princess out of the conference room. They walked through the palace corridors in silence, Velara's guards trailing behind at a respectful distance. Eli had no idea what was happening or what he was supposed to say. He had spent his whole career avoiding attention, and now the most powerful woman in the empire was leading him through her home like an old friend. Finally, they reached the palace gardens. The Cathari gardens were unlike anything on Earth. The trees were made of crystal, catching the light and throwing rainbows across the paths. The fountains flowed with water that glowed softly blue. Strange flowers sang in frequencies just below human hearing, creating a constant gentle hum. Velara stopped beside a pond filled with golden fish. She turned to face Eli, her amber eyes studying him carefully. "You speak our language," she said. "Not the simple version they teach diplomats. The real language." "I have studied it for 6 years," Eli replied. His voice was steady, though his heart was racing. "Your language is beautiful. The way a single word can carry different meanings, depending on emotion and context. The way your poetry changes based on the time of day it is read." Velara's expression softened slightly. "You helped a servant who was beneath your notice. You spoke with a guard, as if he were your equal." "Why?" Eli considered the question seriously. The servant was afraid. She expected to be punished for a simple accident. "I know what that kind of fear feels like. I did not want her to face it alone." He paused. "And the guard was not beneath my notice. He was interesting. He had stories to tell. Why would I not want to hear them?" For a long moment, Velara said nothing. Then she began walking again, and Eli fell into step beside her. 48 suitors," she said quietly. "Princes and generals and heirs to great fortunes. They came with gifts and speeches and demonstrations of power. Not one of them asked me a single question about myself." Eli thought about this. Then he asked, "What would you want them to ask?" The question seemed to surprise her. She walked in silence for several paces, considering her answer. "I would want them to ask what I dream about," she said finally. "What I fear. What I hope for my people beyond the simple continuation of empire." She looked at him. "I would want them to see me as something other than a prize to be won." "That seems reasonable," Eli said. "Everyone deserves to be seen as a person." Velara laughed, a genuine sound that transformed her face from royal mask to real woman. "You are very strange, Eli Porter. I have been told that before. Tell me about your home," she said. "Tell me about Earth." So he did. He told her about Nebraska, where he grew up, about fields of wheat that stretched to the horizon, golden in the summer sun, about storms that turned the sky green before the rain came, about his mother, who taught history and always smelled like coffee, about learning languages as a child, sitting by the radio and repeating words until they felt natural. And she told him about Keth Prime, about the caves beneath the palace where she played as a little girl, about her grandmother's songs, about the loneliness of being raised as a symbol instead of a person dot by the time they returned to the palace. The twin suns had begun to set, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. "Thank you," Velara said softly, "for seeing me." Eli smiled. "Thank you for talking to me." She returned the smile. "I think we will talk again, Eli Porter." He watched her walk away, surrounded by her guards, and wondered what he had gotten himself into. News traveled fast in the imperial palace. By the next morning, everyone knew that Princess Velara had spent the afternoon walking in the gardens with the human translator. The servants talked. The nobles talked. Even the guards talked, though they tried to be quiet about it. Commander Grant was furious. He had been publicly rejected, humiliated in front of the entire court. And now the princess was showing interest in the nobody who carried his bags. It was an insult he could not bear. Ambassador Webb was worried for different reasons. She had come to Keth Prime for trade negotiations, not romantic drama. If the princess's attention to Eli caused problems with the Emperor, their mission could fail completely. But Eli himself felt something he had not felt in a very long time. He felt seen. Over the following days, Velara continued to seek him out. She would appear at the end of negotiations, waiting for him in the corridor. She would send servants to invite him to lunch in the royal library. She would find him in the palace archives, where he spent his free time reading ancient texts. They talked about everything: philosophy and art, science and history. They compared human literature to Keth-Ari epic poetry, finding surprising similarities between stories told light years apart. They debated the ethics of empire, the nature of duty, the meaning of freedom. Eli discovered that Velara was brilliant. Her education had covered every subject imaginable, from military strategy to advanced mathematics. She spoke 7 languages fluently and could discuss the economics of interstellar trade with ease. But beneath all that knowledge, there was a sadness. She had spent her whole life preparing to be a symbol, and no one had ever cared about the person behind the crown. Velara discovered that Eli was wise in ways that had nothing to do with books. He listened without judgment. He asked questions that made her think. He treated her opinions with respect, even when he disagreed with them. And he never, not once, looked at her like she was a prize to be won. One afternoon, they sat together in the crystal caves beneath the palace. It was Velara's favorite place, a secret sanctuary where she had come as a child to escape the pressures of court. The walls glowed with soft blue light, and the sound of underground streams created gentle music in the darkness. "My father is concerned," Velara said. She was sitting on a flat rock, her feet dangling over the water. "He thinks you are distracting me from my duties." Eli sat beside her, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "Am I? Perhaps?" She smiled slightly. "But it is a welcome distraction. What does your duty require?" He asked. "Marriage, alliance, the continuation of the empire." She sighed. "I have known this since I was a child. A princess does not marry for love. She marries for politics. That sounds lonely. It is." She looked at him with those amber eyes that seemed to see right through him. "But lately, I have been less lonely." Eli felt his heart beating faster. He was not foolish enough to believe that a princess of an ancient empire could truly care for a simple translator from Nebraska. But something was happening between them, something he did not fully understand. "I should tell you something," he said carefully. "I am not important. I have no wealth, no title, no political power. Back home, I am nobody. I translate documents and study languages. That is all I am." "Is that what you believe?" Velara asked. "That your value comes from wealth and titles? No, but your people believe it. Your father believes it. The court believes it. And you think I believe it too?" Eli hesitated. "I think you have been taught to believe it your whole life." Velara was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "My grandmother told me a story once about a princess who fell in love with a gardener. The gardener had no wealth, no power, nothing but his kindness and his gentle hands. The princess's father was furious. He demanded that she choose someone worthy of her station. What did she do? She asked her father a question. She said, 'Father, when you die, will your wealth comfort you? Will your power keep you warm? Or would you rather have someone who truly loves you holding your hand?' What did the father say?" Velara smiled sadly. He had no answer. He had never thought about death that way. He had spent his whole life accumulating power, and it had never occurred to him that power meant nothing at the end. Did the princess marry the gardener? No. She did her duty and married a prince from a distant system. The marriage was cold and empty, and she spent the rest of her life wondering what might have been. Velara paused. My grandmother was that princess. Eli understood then. Velara was not just rebelling against tradition for the sake of rebellion. She had seen the cost of duty without love. She had watched her grandmother suffer in silence. I am sorry, he said quietly. Do not be sorry. Be honest with me. She turned to face him fully. Do you care for me, Eli Porter? Not for the princess, not for the crown. For me. The question hung in the air between them. Eli knew that his answer would change everything. If he said yes, he would be setting himself against the most powerful empire in the galaxy. If he said no, he would lose something precious. He took a deep breath. Yes, I care for you. I have cared for you since the moment you looked at that servant girl with kindness instead of anger. I care for the woman who asks questions instead of demanding answers. I care for the person who has spent her whole life being lonely and deserves to be seen. Velara's eyes glistened with tears she would not let fall. That is a dangerous thing to say. I know. My father will never accept it. I know. The court will think you are a fool. Let them. She laughed then, a sound of pure surprise and joy. You really do not care about any of it, do you? The power, the politics, the danger. I care about you, Eli said simply. Everything else is noise. Velara reached out and took his hand. Her skin was cool and smooth, different from human skin, but somehow familiar. They sat together in the glowing cave, two people from different worlds, holding on to something that felt like hope. My father will summon you soon, she said. He will try to frighten you away. He will threaten you, offer you bribes, do everything he can to make you leave. And what should I do? Be yourself. She squeezed his hand. That is all I ask. Just be yourself. Let him see what I see. What do you see? Velara smiled, and for a moment she looked younger than her years. I see a man who does not know how special he is. I see someone who listens when others speak, who notices what others ignore, who finds value in things that have no price. She paused. I see the first person in my entire life who has looked at me and seen a woman instead of a crown. Eli did not know what to say, so he simply held her hand and sat with her in the darkness. Surrounded by glowing crystals and the soft music of underground streams, for the first time in a long time, he did not feel invisible Dodd, and for the first time in her life, Velara did not feel alone. The summons came 3 days later. Eli was in the archives, reading an ancient text about Kethari wedding traditions, when 2 Imperial guards appeared at the door. They were enormous, nearly 7 feet tall, with ceremonial spears that looked sharp enough to cut through steel. The Emperor wishes to see you, one of them said. It was not a request. Eli closed his book and followed them through the palace. The corridors seemed longer than usual, the ceilings higher, the shadows deeper. He knew what was coming. Velara had warned him, but knowing did not make it any easier. The throne room was the largest space Eli had ever seen. The ceiling rose so high that it disappeared into darkness. The walls were covered with tapestries showing the history of the Kethari Empire, 10,000 years of conquest and glory. And at the far end of the room, on a throne carved from a single piece of black crystal, sat Emperor Draskan. The emperor was massive, even by Kethari standards. He stood nearly 8 feet tall, with shoulders broad enough to block out the light behind him. His amber eyes burned like fire as Eli walked toward him, and his voice, when he spoke, seemed to shake the very floor. So you are the human who has captured my daughter's attention. Eli stopped at the proper distance and bowed. Your Majesty, do you know why I have summoned you? I believe so, Your Majesty. Then you know that I am not pleased. The Emperor leaned forward, his enormous hands gripping the arms of his throne. My daughter is the heir to an empire that spans 100 star systems. She will one day rule over billions of souls. Her marriage is not a personal matter. It is a matter of state. I understand, Your Majesty. Do you? The Emperor's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. Let me be clear about what I see when I look at you. I see a small, weak creature from a young species. I see a man with no wealth, no army, no political connections. I see nothing that could possibly benefit my empire or my daughter. Eli felt fear crawling up his spine, but he forced himself to meet the Emperor's gaze. With respect, Your Majesty, I think you have just explained why your daughter chose to speak with me. The Emperor's eyes narrowed. Explain. Every suitor who has come before her has offered the same things: power, wealth, military alliance. They have treated her like a prize to be won, a stepping stone to greater glory. Eli's voice was steady, though his hands trembled at his sides. Your daughter does not want to be a prize. She wants to be seen as a person, and that is something that no amount of wealth or power can buy. For a long moment, the Emperor said nothing. The silence in the throne room was absolute. Then he laughed. It was not a kind laugh. It was the laugh of a predator playing with its prey. You have courage, he admitted. More than I expected from a human. But courage alone does not make a worthy match for a princess of the Cathari. No, Eli agreed. It does not. But perhaps the princess should decide what makes a worthy match for herself. The Emperor's expression hardened. You forget your place, human. I do not forget anything, Your Majesty. I simply believe that your daughter is wiser than anyone gives her credit for. She has rejected 48 suitors because none of them saw her as a person. She has chosen to spend time with me because I do. Eli took a deep breath. I am not here to demand anything. I am not here to claim your daughter like a trophy. I am here because she asked me to be here, and I believe she deserves the right to make her own choices. The Emperor rose from his throne. He seemed to fill the entire room, a mountain of power and authority. He descended the steps slowly, each footfall echoing like thunder, until he stood directly before Eli. I could have you killed, he said quietly. I could have you sent back to Earth in disgrace. I could make your life so miserable that you would beg me for death. Eli looked up at the towering figure before him. You could, but it would not change how your daughter feels, and it would not make her choose anyone else. Before the Emperor could respond, the doors to the throne room burst open. Velara strode in, her amber eyes blazing with fury. Her guards rushed after her, but she waved them away. She crossed the throne room with quick, determined steps until she stood between her father and Eli. You will not threaten him, she said. Her voice was ice and steel. The Emperor's expression flickered with surprise. Daughter, this is not your concern. He is my concern. Velara turned to face her father fully. I know what you are doing. I know you are trying to frighten him away, just as you frightened away anyone who ever showed genuine interest in me instead of my crown. I am protecting you. You are imprisoning me. Her voice rose. For years, I have done my duty. I have attended every ceremony, studied every lesson, met every suitor you placed before me. I have been the perfect princess. And what has it brought me? Loneliness, emptiness, a life without meaning. The Emperor's face softened slightly. Velara, no, you do not get to speak. She stepped closer to him, and for all his size and power, he seemed to shrink before her anger. I have finally found someone who sees me. Not the crown, not the empire, me, and you want to take that away, because he does not fit your idea of what a prince should be. He has nothing to offer, the Emperor protested. He offers everything that matters. Velara took Eli's hand in hers. He offers kindness, patience, understanding. He offers to listen when I speak and to see me as I truly am. She raised her chin defiantly. I have made my choice, Father. I choose Eli Porter, and nothing you say or do will change my mind. The throne room fell silent. Courtiers who had gathered at the edges of the room held their breath. Guards stood frozen at their posts. Even the flames in the great braziers seemed to stop flickering. Emperor Draskon looked at his daughter for a long time. Then he looked at Eli, still holding her hand, still standing straight despite his obvious fear. You truly love her? The emperor asked quietly. With all my heart, Eli replied. And you will protect her? Care for her? Stand beside her even when the entire galaxy questions your worth? I will. The emperor closed his eyes. For a moment, he looked old, tired, like a man who had carried the weight of an empire for too long. My own marriage was arranged, he said finally. I barely knew your mother when we wed. I learned to love her over time, but I always wondered. He trailed off, then shook his head. I never wanted that for you. I wanted you to have something more, something real. Then let me have it, Velara said softly. The emperor opened his eyes. He looked at Eli, truly looked at him, perhaps for the first time. If you hurt her, he said, I will destroy your entire species. Eli nodded. Understood, Your Majesty. Then, slowly, the emperor extended his hand. Eli took it, and they shook, the tiny human hand engulfed by the massive Cathari grip. Welcome to the family, the emperor said. May the gods help us all. Velara threw her arms around her father, hugging him for the first time in years. And Eli stood beside them, overwhelmed and grateful and absolutely terrified of what came next. But he was not alone. And neither was she. That was all that mattered. The announcement shook the empire. Princess Velara of the Cathari, heir to 100 star systems, had chosen a human. Not a warrior or a prince or a diplomat, but a quiet translator who'd spent his life learning to understand others. The news spread across the galaxy like wildfire, carried by ships and signals to every inhabited world. Some were outraged. How could the princess lower herself to marry such an insignificant creature? Humans were newcomers to the galactic stage, barely worth noticing. This marriage was an insult to the ancient bloodlines of the Cathari nobility. Others were fascinated. The princes who rejected 48 powerful suitors had finally found someone worthy of her attention. What did this human possess that all those princes and generals lacked? The gossip networks buzzed with theories and speculation, and some, mostly the young people of the empire who had grown tired of tradition, were hopeful. If the princess could choose love over politics, perhaps change was possible. Perhaps the old ways did not have to last forever. Commander Grant resigned from the human delegation and returned to Earth in disgrace. His career never recovered. Ambassador Webb, after getting over her shock, recognized the opportunity before her. With the princes on their side, humanity's position in the galactic community had changed overnight. She negotiated the most favorable trade agreement in Earth's history before the wedding even took place. The wedding was held 3 months later. In the crystal caves beneath the Imperial Palace, it was tradition for Cathari royalty to wed in a place of personal meaning. When Velara chose the caves where she had played as a child, where she and Eli had first admitted their feelings to each other, no one objected. The glowing walls and underground streams created a setting more beautiful than any decorated hall could offer. Eli spent the weeks before the ceremony learning everything he could about Cathari wedding customs. The traditional vows were complex, filled with ancient words and symbolic phrases that took him hours to memorize. He practiced them every day, determined to honor Velara's culture, even as he brought his own humanity to the Union. The day of the wedding arrived under clear skies and bright suns. Ships from dozens of worlds filled the space above Keth Prime, their passengers eager to witness the historic event. The caves were filled with guests, Cathari nobles in their finest robes, human dignitaries in formal attire, representatives from allied species who had come to pay their respects. Eli stood at the altar, wearing a suit that had been custom-made to blend human and Cathari styles. His heart was pounding so hard, he was sure everyone could hear it. Beside him stood the priest who would conduct the ceremony, an ancient female with silver in her hair and wisdom in her eyes. Then the music began, and Valara appeared at the entrance to the chamber. She wore a gown of flowing crystal that caught the light and scattered it like stars. Her amber eyes were bright with joy, and she smiled at Ela with such warmth that he forgot how to breathe. She walked toward him slowly, each step measured and graceful. And when she reached his side, she took his hands in hers. The priest spoke the ancient words, blessing their union in the name of gods older than human civilization. Then she turned to Eli and invited him to speak his vows. He had practiced the Cathari words until they were perfect. But Valara had asked him to also speak in his own words, from his own heart. So after the traditional phrases, he continued. "Valara," he said, his voice steady despite his nerves, "I am not a prince. I have no armies, no wealth, no great deeds to offer you. I am only a man who has spent his life learning to listen, to understand, to see the truth beneath the surface." He squeezed her hands gently. "I promise to always see you. Not the crown, not the title, not the power you represent. You, the woman who laughs at bad jokes and loves ancient poetry and hides in caves when the pressure becomes too much." A soft laugh rippled through the guests. Valara's smile widened. "I promise to listen when you speak," Eli continued, "to ask the questions that matter, to stand beside you in joy and in sorrow, in triumph and in failure. I promise to be your partner, your friend, your equal. I promise to love you not as a symbol, but as a person, complicated and beautiful and worthy of being known." Valara's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. When it was her turn to speak, she delivered the traditional vows in flawless Cathari, then switched to English for her personal words. "Eli Porter," she said, "you found me when I was lost. You saw me when I was invisible. In a universe of people who wanted something from me, you were the only one who asked what I wanted for myself." She lifted one hand to touch his face gently. "I have been a princess my entire life. I have been prepared for duty and sacrifice and the cold mathematics of political marriage. I never believed I would find something real, something that was mine." Her voice caught slightly. "You are mine, and I am yours. Today and tomorrow and for all the days after. I choose you, Eli, not because I must, but because you have shown me what it means to be truly seen." The priest declared them married. The caves erupted in cheers and applause, and Eli kissed his wife for the first time, surrounded by glowing crystals and the soft music of underground streams. The celebration lasted for 3 days. There was feasting and dancing, speeches and toasts, traditions from 100 worlds blended together in joyful chaos. Eli met so many dignitaries and nobles that their faces blurred together. But he smiled and shook hands and did his best to be worthy of the woman he had married. On the evening of the second day, Emperor Draskan found Eli alone on a balcony overlooking the crystal caves. The emperor had been distant during the festivities, watching from the edges with an expression that was hard to read. "You know," the emperor said, "in all my years I have never seen my daughter so happy." Eli turned to face him. "She deserves to be happy, Your Majesty. Yes, she does." The emperor was quiet for a moment. "I owe you an apology. When you first came to my throne room, I saw only what you lacked. I did not see what you possessed. And what do I possess? Something I lost long ago." The emperor's voice was soft, almost sad. "The ability to care for something beyond power. The wisdom to know that love is more valuable than conquest." He placed a heavy hand on Eli's shoulder. "Take care of her, human. She is the best thing this empire has ever produced." "I will protect her happiness with my life," Eli said. The Emperor nodded slowly. Then, for the first time, he smiled. "Perhaps you are not so insignificant after all." On the final night of the celebration, Eli and Velara stood together on the highest balcony of the palace. Looking out at the twin moons of Keth Prime, the sky was filled with stars. Countless points of light representing worlds they might one day visit together. "Are you happy?" Velara asked, leaning her head against his shoulder. "Happier than I have ever been," Eli replied. "And terrified." She laughed softly. "Terrified of what?" "Of the future. Of being a prince in an alien empire. Of raising children who might have amber eyes and human noses." He smiled. "Of somehow messing this up and losing you." Velara lifted her head and looked at him with those glowing eyes that had captured his heart from the first moment. "You will not lose me. I chose you, Eli, not because you are perfect, but because you are real. Because you see me as I truly am, and you love me anyway." "I do love you," he said. "More than I have words to express." "Then we will find new words together." She kissed him gently. "We have a lifetime to learn them." They stood together under the alien stars. Two people from different worlds who had found something precious in each other. The quiet human who had spent his life being invisible. The princess who had spent her life being seen only for what she represented. Together, they were finally home. Somewhere below, the celebration continued. Music drifted up through the night air, mixing with the songs of crystal flowers and the whisper of distant waterfalls. The empire stretched out before them, vast and ancient and full of possibilities. And Eli Porter, the translator from Nebraska, who had stumbled into the greatest adventure of his life, held his wife's hand and smiled at the stars. Sometimes, the greatest strength was not in commanding attention, but in giving it. Sometimes, the most powerful thing a person could do was simply listen. He had learned that lesson long ago. And now, because of it, he had found his place among the stars. Not through conquest, not through ambition, but through the simple, profound act of paying attention. The universe was vast and strange and full of wonders. And for the first time in his life, Eli was exactly where he was meant to be.